Here's a short, powerful hook you can use at the very start of the story to pull listeners in. Sometimes, all it takes is a single smile, one glance that unsettles everything you thought you knew about yourself and whispers that your life is about to change forever. Do you want me to craft 7 different hooks, one for each part, so every episode/chapter opens strong for YouTube? I never believed a single smile could change the rhythm of my life. But hers did. It happened on one of those late afternoons when the world feels slower, softer. The cafe was alive with its usual noises, spoons clinking against porcelain, a low hum of voices, the hiss of milk steaming. Sunlight spilled through the wide front windows, throwing golden streaks across the floor, catching in the wisps of steam rising from mugs. I remember sitting there, half lost in thought, when I looked up and saw her. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary. She was simply waiting in line, one hand resting lightly on the counter, the other brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. But when she glanced my way and smiled, it wasn't the kind of smile you give to be polite or the kind you throw carelessly at strangers. It was softer, more deliberate, as though she saw something in me worth pausing for. And in that pause, I felt the ground shift. Her smile wasn't wide or forced. It was subtle, but it carried weight. It was the smile of someone who had lived through enough to know what mattered and still chose to give a piece of warmth away. For a second, I forgot to breathe. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with a strange rush of recognition, as if some hidden part of me had been waiting for this exact moment. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. My eyes stayed locked on hers, tracing the faint lines at the edges of her gaze, the graceful way she carried herself. She looked older than me, not in a way that diminished her, but in a way that made her presence steadier, more assured. And that difference didn't push me away. It drew me in. The barista handed her coffee, and she turned slightly, scanning the room for a seat. When her eyes caught mine again, she didn't hesitate. She walked over, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor, and set her cup on the table across from me. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice calm, low, carrying a hint of something unspoken. I managed to nod, though my throat had gone dry. And as she sat down, I felt the warmth of her smile lingering in the air between us, like sunlight that refuses to fade. In that instant, I knew something had shifted, not in the room, but in me. I couldn't explain it, couldn't even name it. All I knew was that her smile had opened a door I hadn't realized was closed, and whatever lay on the other side, it was going to change everything. That the first few words between us felt simple, almost ordinary, but the way they lingered afterward told me they weren't. She had asked if the seat was taken, and when I said no, she settled into the chair across from me with the kind of poise that made the air feel charged, as if the entire cafe had gone quieter just for us. Her voice carried a gentle strength, not loud, not sharp, but resonant, like a melody that stays long after the music stops. She spoke about small things at first, how she always came to this cafe on her way home, how she liked the way the sunlight caught the wood grain of the tables at this hour. I found myself listening more deeply than I usually did, as though every word mattered. When I answered, she looked directly at me, her gaze unwavering, as though she had nowhere else she wanted to be. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, the steady, undistracted way she gave herself to a conversation. It disarmed me, made me want to offer the same in return. As she talked, I noticed details I couldn't stop cataloging. The way her hand curved around the coffee cup, elegant even in its stillness. The faint traces of laughter lines near her eyes that only deepened her beauty. The way she tilted her head slightly when she was truly listening, as if to open herself fully to my words. Time bent strangely around us. Minutes slipped into what felt like hours, yet I didn't want the moment to end. The world outside the cafe, the traffic, the rush, the noise seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the warmth of her presence, the sense that I was sitting across from someone who carried whole stories inside her, and who, for reasons I couldn't fathom, was willing to share pieces of them with me. At one point, our hands brushed when we both reached to adjust something on the table. It was nothing more than a fleeting touch, a soft graze of her skin against mine, but it sent a quiet shock through me. Warmth spread from that single point of contact, threading into my chest, making me swallow hard to keep steady. She didn't pull back quickly or make it awkward. Instead, she let her fingers rest just a fraction longer than necessary before retreating with a small, knowing smile. That smile stayed with me long after the moment passed. It wasn't playful, not teasing. It was something deeper, something that seemed to say she had felt it too. And for the rest of our conversation, I found myself searching her eyes for confirmation of that unspoken truth. By the time she stood to leave, the afternoon light had shifted into the soft glow of early evening. She slipped her bag over her shoulder, her movements graceful, unhurried. "It was good talking with you," she said, and though her words were simple, the way she said them made me feel as though she had shared a secret with me. When she walked out, the cafe felt suddenly emptier, like the air had been drawn out with her. I sat there, my hand still tingling faintly where hers had brushed it, realizing that some conversations don't just end. They stay with you, echoing quietly, daring you to wonder what they've begun. After that day, it became harder to pretend our meetings were accidental. We crossed paths too often, lingered too long in each other's company. If it wasn't the cafe, it was the bookstore down the street, or a quiet walk that somehow stretched well past sunset. And each time, I felt the quiet pull between us grow stronger, something invisible but undeniable, like the tide tugging at the shore. She carried herself with ease, a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from living long enough to know what mattered and what didn't. Around her, I felt younger, yes, but not in a way that diminished me. She made me aware of myself in ways I hadn't been before. The way I listened, the way I laughed, the way my heart reacted when her shoulder brushed mine as we walked side by side. One evening stands out most. We had finished dinner at a small corner bistro, the kind of place lit with candles and soft music, where conversations could stretch without being rushed. She leaned across the table, laughing at something I said. Not politely, not for my sake, but genuinely, the quiet pull between us had become undeniable, yet it was precisely that undeniable truth that made silence creep into our moments. There were evenings when everything flowed effortlessly, laughter spilling into the night, conversations that left me restless with their intimacy. And then there were evenings when we fell into a different kind of quiet, not awkward, but heavy, as though both of us were guarding words we weren't sure should be spoken. One night, after another long walk, I drove her home. The car was filled with the soft hum of the radio, nothing more than background noise, but the air between us seemed alive, tense. She sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap, gazing out the window, the faint glow of streetlights tracing her profile. There was a softness in her expression, but also a shadow, as though she were caught between wanting to lean closer and reminding herself not to. I wanted to speak, to name what I was feeling, to tell her how every glance, every brush of her hand was changing me. But the words stuck in my throat. I was terrified of breaking something fragile, of pushing too far and watching her retreat. And so I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, my heartbeat loud in the stillness. When I pulled up in front of her place, neither of us moved at first. The engine idled, headlights casting pale beams across the street, and for a moment it felt like we were caught in some suspended time where the world waited for us to decide. Her hand shifted on her lap, inching just slightly toward the center console, close enough that I felt its presence. Mine twitched in response, almost rising to meet hers, but I stopped, paralyzed between longing and hesitation. She turned to me, then, her eyes searching mine with a depth that made it hard to breathe. There was vulnerability there, and something unspoken, almost like a question. Yet when her lips parted, the words never came. Instead, she offered a small, weary smile, one that carried both warmth and restraint. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered, her voice steady but softer than usual. I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. As she reached for the door handle, I almost stopped her, almost asked her to stay, to admit what we both were feeling. But fear held me back. Fear of what others might think. Fear of overstepping. fear of ruining the delicate thing we had built. She stepped out into the cool night air, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. For a moment she lingered, leaning down to meet my eyes again through the open door. The pause was long enough to feel significant, to ache with what we didn't say. And then she closed the door gently, walking away beneath the glow of the porch light. I sat there, unmoving, my hand still trembling faintly near the place where hers had almost touched. The silence in the car pressed in around me, thick with all the words left unspoken. And in that silence, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful truths live not in what we confess, but in what we hold back. Silence had been our companion too long. The weight of what we weren't saying had started to feel heavier than the conversations themselves, pressing on us in every pause, every lingering glance. I knew it couldn't last forever. Something had to break, and it did, not in a dramatic explosion, but in the softest, most human way. It was late, a quiet evening where the world outside seemed muted. We had been walking again, circling the park that had become ours, the one where the paths curved beneath old trees, where the lamplight spilled in golden pools. She seemed distant that night, her eyes catching the ground more often than mine, her laughter slower to rise. I could feel it, the careful wall she was building, the way she was pulling back. Finally, when we reached a bench tucked beneath a canopy of leaves, she stopped. She sat down slowly, her hands clasped together, her posture straighter than usual, as though bracing herself. I sat beside her, close enough to sense her warmth, but not so close as to cross a boundary she hadn't invited me past. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The night was alive with crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, but between us, silence. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years inside it. "I don't know if this is right," she murmured, her voice low, almost lost to the night. I turned to her, searching her face. Her eyes glistened faintly in the lamplight, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected, fear. Not of me, but of everything else. Of what people might think, of the difference in our lives, of the risk of letting herself care. I'm afraid," she continued, her words trembling at the edges. "Afraid of what this could mean. Afraid of being foolish. Afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you want someone different, someone who fits better." She laughed softly, but it wasn't joy. It was the laugh people use to hide the crack in their voice. My chest tightened because I had felt her fear in the spaces between us, but hearing it aloud made it real. I reached for her hand then, not quickly, not boldly, but gently, placing mine over hers where they rested on her lap. She flinched at first, as though she wasn't ready, but then she let her fingers unfold beneath mine. Her skin was warm, soft, trembling slightly against my touch. "I don't know what the future looks like," I admitted, my own voice unsteady. "But I know what this feels like right here, right now. And it feels like something I don't want to lose." Her eyes closed briefly, as if the words were both a relief and a burden. When she opened them again, she squeezed my hand, not lightly, not uncertainly, but with steady pressure, as though grounding herself. Her thumb brushed across the back of my hand, slow, deliberate, carrying more meaning than words ever could. In that moment, vulnerability didn't weaken her. It made her stronger. It drew us closer. The silence was gone now, replaced by something new, a fragile honesty that stretched between us, delicate but real. And as we sat there beneath the glow of the lamplight, hand in hand, I knew we had crossed a threshold we couldn't step back from. When honesty finally cracked the silence between us, it changed everything. From that night on the bench, where she let her fears spill into the open, and I promised her that what we felt was real, the air between us no longer carried only tension. It carried possibility. Still, neither of us rushed. Every step closer seemed fragile, like stepping on a new ground we weren't sure could hold our weight. A few days later, we found ourselves back at the cafe where it had all begun. The late afternoon light slanted in through the windows, painting her hair in shades of amber and gold. She sat across from me, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her eyes not on the cup but on me. There was a softness there, a quiet acceptance, as though she had made peace with something. We talked about small things at first, books, work, memories of childhood, but beneath it all, the current of something unspoken tugged at us. When her hand slipped onto the table, resting just inches from mine, I knew she was giving me the chance to close the space. My heart hammered against my ribs, and slowly, carefully, I laid my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, steady, familiar now. She turned her palm to meet mine, lacing our fingers together as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I looked up, and her smile, the same smile that had unraveled me that first day, met me again. Only now it carried more, not just warmth, but trust. We left the cafe together, walking without hurry, letting the evening embrace us. The city sounds faded into the background, footsteps on pavement, the soft chatter of passers-by. None of it mattered. When we reached the quiet of her street, we stopped beneath the soft glow of a street lamp. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was full, but it no longer pressed down on us. It invited us closer. She stepped toward me first, her hands slipping gently up to my shoulders. Instinctively, I wrapped my arms around her waist, drawing her nearer. And then it happened, the first true embrace. Her cheek rested against my chest, her breath warm and steady against me. I felt the rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat pressed close to mine. My hands settled at the small of her back, memorizing the shape of her, the way she fit against me, as though she had always been meant to. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The world fell away, leaving only the two of us, holding each other as if the simple act could ward off every doubt, every fear. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes shimmered in the lamplight. I brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, my fingertips grazing her temple. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned closer, pressing a gentle kiss against my cheek. Not rushed, not hesitant, but lingering, full of quiet promise. In that moment, I understood what her smile had meant all along. This wasn't just change. This was the beginning of something we had both been waiting for, even if we hadn't known it. The first embrace had changed the air between us forever. After that night beneath the street lamp, there was no more pretending, no more trying to explain away what was happening. Something had shifted quietly but completely, and we both knew it. Yet what surprised me wasn't the intensity, it was the ease. What had once felt like a fragile secret now began to feel like something steady, something we could let breathe. The days that followed were filled with small, ordinary moments that somehow carried extraordinary weight. She invited me over one Saturday morning, her voice casual, but I could hear the warmth behind it. When I arrived, the scent of fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the oven filled her home. The space was simple but elegant, filled with books and framed photographs that spoke of a life well lived. I found myself looking at those pieces of her world, realizing I wanted to know every story behind them. We made breakfast together, nothing complicated, just eggs, toast, and the pastry she had pulled from the oven. But even in the simplicity of that morning, there was a tenderness that made my chest ache. She moved around the kitchen with practiced grace, and I found myself watching the way her hand brushed stray flour from the counter, the way she laughed when I cracked an egg poorly, the way she nudged me lightly with her shoulder as if letting me know I belonged there. At the table, sunlight poured through the window, casting soft patterns across her face. She reached across to pour me another cup of coffee, her hand brushing mine in the process, and this time neither of us pulled away. Our fingers lingered, twined loosely, even as we continued talking about nothing and everything. Later, we went for a walk, hand in hand, through the park where she had once confessed her fears. The same path, the same lamplights, but now the air felt different. She no longer walked with the careful distance she once held. Instead, she leaned gently into me, her arm brushing against mine as though it had always belonged there. People passed by, but for the first time, neither of us seemed to care who noticed. At one point, she stopped, tugging me gently to a quieter spot beneath an old oak tree. She looked up at me, her expression calm, but her eyes full of something unspoken. I bent slightly, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, letting my lips linger there. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it carried every word I couldn't yet say. She closed her eyes, smiling in that quiet, knowing way that had started everything. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Love doesn't always begin with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it begins with a smile across a crowded room, a hand brushing against yours, a simple morning shared over coffee. Sometimes it grows slowly, patiently, until you wake one day and realize it has quietly become the most certain thing in your life. She smiled again then, that same smile that had undone me from the beginning, but now it carried something new. Not just change, but promise. A future we would step into together, one steady, tender moment at a time.